This program was recorded with a live audience. Please forgive the occasional sound fluctuations.
This program has a unique title. It's called It's Never Crowded, Along the Extra Mile. And that is something that came to me many years ago from an observation in a poem called The Road Less Traveled. And I thought about that road less traveled a lot. And I've often said to my children, and I've observed it in my own life, that that whole idea of being willing to go the extra mile, that when you do that, you're always, or almost always, on what we call the road that is less traveled. It's not crowded out there. And I'm not talking here about principles or ideas or secrets for success and inner peace that have to do with getting ahead, with making more money than the next guy, with being better than anybody else, with accumulating a lot of things. I'm speaking here about the extra mile in which you are living a deeper and a richer experience of life, and that all of the other people that you run into in your life who are not there with you, or that you are observing living lives of turmoil and anxiety and worry and stress and so much of the stuff that occupies most people's lives is just not a part of your life any longer. And I believe there's a place that you can reach, and I believe these 10 principles, they're not just something that I said, all right, I got to come up with 10 things, so here, let's start numbering. I've been giving commencement speeches for the past 30 years. I've attended many, many commencements. It seems like every year I go to a commencement. When you have 8 children, they're always graduating from something, right? Whether it's nursery school or grade school or graduate school. And I've listened to a lot of these talks, and I've given a lot of these talks, and they always, of course, talk about how the word commencement means to commence, and that you're going to start, and this is just an opening and a beginning. And then most of the time, there is a launching into the means for being successful that have a lot to do with what I call the ego. That is evaluating who you are on the basis of how much you get and how much you achieve and what your reputation is. And these are not what the principles that I speak about at all in the commencement addresses that I've given, nor will they be the focus of this program and what we're speaking about here. I was handed a book when I was a young man, when I graduated from high school, by my uncle, called Think and Grow Rich, by Napoleon Hill. And I read it when I was in the Navy. I joined the Navy right after high school in 1958. And I was aboard ship out in the Pacific, and I just started reading this book. And it really wasn't about it wasn't about getting rich, I should say. It wasn't about making a lot of money. It was really about living a deeper and a richer experience of life. And he was making distinctions in there between people who are able to create a life in which they live everything that they want and are able to attract into their lives the things that are important to them, and the people who can't do those things. And in the process of reading it, I was immediately sorry that I had joined the Navy for 4 years. And I had 4 years ahead of me to contemplate trying to live in a system in which I was required to be just like everybody else, and a system in which I had to dress like everybody else, and a system in which having a mind of your own was, let's just say, it was not encouraged at that time. And it still isn't in those kinds of operations. And this isn't at all a put down of the military in any way. It was, I began to realize at a very young age that there was something that was much deeper about creating a life of what I would like to have in my life. And I also realized that I had been doing a lot of it for most of my life up until that point. That growing up in a series of foster homes and orphanages as a young man, I had somehow been able to figure out naturally how to attract abundance into my life without being consumed with worry about scarcity and not having enough, if you will. I had been just fortunate enough to know that if I could put my mind and my thoughts and my attention on what it is that I wanted to create for myself, that I had the ability to make it happen. And I did it always, even as a very young boy. And one of the things that Napoleon Hill spoke about that really became a very important item for me in my life was this idea of having what he called this burning desire. And a burning desire is something that is very different than a normal desire that everybody has. Because if you study Buddhist texts, they talk about how it's important to get past desire in your life. And I tried to do that for a while, but I found as long as I'm incarnated into this physical body, desires just go with the program. It seems to me anyway. I mean, even if you want to go to the bathroom, you got to figure out how to get there. Desire just seems to be not something that is so bad. I never thought it was something. Deepak Chopra and I have talked many, many times. In fact, in some of the tapes we've put out together, we've talked about this idea that desire isn't anything that is bad. It's when it becomes something that we become attached to, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the very first principle. But a burning desire is something very different. And I don't know, I'm not certain about this. I have 8 children, and I watched 5 of them be born. Before that, they didn't even allow men on the same floor, all right? But as I watched these children being born, and I was cutting the cord and holding these tiny little infants who just showed up in the world, and then I watched them grow, and now they're adults, young adults, and some of them are still teenagers. I have a sense that we come into this world with personalities and with a purpose. Khalil Gibran, the great Lebanese poet, once said that when you are born, your work is placed in your heart. And I have a very strong sense that there's much more to us showing up here in this world and what took place before that. I'm not talking about past lives, although I've read Many Lives, Many Masters, and I've talked with Brian Weiss and people like this about this, and certainly I haven't closed myself off to it. But I haven't any internal personal experiences of something called a past life. But I have 8 children, and I've seen those children come in, and the ones that came in and were angry when they showed up and were screaming and hollering, and you couldn't get them to get quiet, and they wouldn't sleep through the night, and they stuck their tongue out at you when you looked at them. Now they're in their 20s, and I come home, and they still are angry, and they still are not happy to see me. And the ones that were laughing and happy and slept through the night and were very peaceful, and 18, 20 years later, they seem to be very peaceful. And they say there's just seem to be, like we almost come in with personalities. And there's hardly a mother that has given birth to a child who doesn't understand what I'm talking about. I see mothers here in the room. I know you're mothers because you're going like this and that. And you saw those babies come in, and you saw them have something called a personality. And if they have that, I mean, I have one daughter who came into this world with language. from another place. And when you sleep in the same room with her, when you slept in the same room with her when she was 3 and 4 years old, she was doing something very oriental. And she would go through all of these kinds of motions and all of that. And now when she's now 16, and I slept in a room with her not too long ago in a motel, and she was in the bed across the room, and all of a sudden in the middle of the night I thought I was in Vietnam or I was in Cambodia or something, and this person was doing these and I remember taking her to a place in Bali when she was 3 or 4 years old, and the very first time she ever saw rice, she ate it as if she was Oriental. She was doing this. When we saw the rice paddies driving through in Bali, I've never had seen her get with that kind of excitement, almost as if she recognized something. It was almost as if she felt she had come home. And I could go into long stories about this young woman, but I haven't a sense that there is more to it, that we do come into this world with something, and I believe that we come in with a heroic mission. We show up here with something, some reason for us, and inside of each and every one of us, there is a desire to be able to do something, to be able to create something, a desire to prove something in one's life, whatever it might be. And I've had it my entire life, and I've never been able to put it out. But the question that I have as I begin this program is whether or not you can infuse it in others. Whether you can give somebody who doesn't have a burning desire that burning desire and act. I think it takes a very high level of consciousness to be able to influence people in that way. I suggest that it's possible, but I do know for certain that any person, at any time, at any moment in their life, when they are ready, when they truly are ready, that whatever teachers or whatever you need to be able to infuse yourself with that kind of burning desire, you can have it. It can happen in an instant. And that powerful change can take place in moments. In fact, that's the only place it ever does take change. I remember a woman telling me that my young daughter, at that time she was about 6, had been invited to come over to her house by her daughter. And she had been 75 to 100 pounds overweight for her entire life, her entire adult life. And my little girl looked at her girlfriend's mother, whom she had never seen before, and blurted out, "I didn't know your mommy was fat." I don't know where she gets that kind of, audacity. I don't know, just to speak what's on her mind. But at any rate, she did. And the mother looked at her and heard out of the mouth of this little child these words. And she said, "I decided in that instant that I was never going to be fat again." She said she was my teacher. And I had a level of readiness to change it. And she said, I hadn't been able to do it for my entire adult life, which was over 20 years. And she was trim and slim and has been for 10 or 12 years. And when she was ready, the teacher appeared in the form of one of my little wiseacre children, making that kind of an observation. And a burning desire is something that we can be infused with. I remember receiving a letter from a woman in Seattle, Washington, who was a crack cocaine addict, prostitute, living on the streets, and was as far down as it's possible for a human being to get. She was waking up each morning in her own vomit and in her own urine. And she was living the life of someone who was not going to be alive very much longer. She had lost a lot of weight. Her skin was peeling off. Apparently crack cocaine has all kinds of horrible reactions on the skin and so on. And she was getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And she walked into a drugstore and there was a spindle there with audio tapes on it, a series of them, and she spun it around, and she was going to steal something so that she could go out and get some more cocaine. And there was a tape on there that I had produced 25 years before, called How to Be a No-Limit Person. And she stole the tape and put it in her purse and went back to whatever hotel room that she was staying in, and there was a cassette player in there, and she put the tape in, and she wrote me a letter after listening to that tape and made contact with me and told me that she wanted to clean up her life and so on, and I started talking to her, and we went on a national television show about a year later, and today, many, many years later, I still get a Christmas card from her every year, and I still talk to her periodically. She has 2 children, she's married, and she runs her own business. She's president of her own business. She transformed her life in an instant. So that when people say it's impossible to change, or that I can't do something, or something is impossible, I always think about that burning desire, that once it's placed in there, and once you have it. And I was approached by the people at public television to put together a couple of programs a few years back based upon 2 of my earlier books. One was called Manifest Your Destiny, and the other was called Wisdom of the Ages. And I was told by all of the people who are knowledgeable about public television that America wouldn't really be receptive to donating money and pledging support to public television for messages that have something to do with spirituality, higher consciousness, and self-development and so on, that this just wasn't, it wasn't something that you could raise money for public television of. So in the process of putting the shows together, we found that we didn't have very much support from the executives in charge of public television specials. And we couldn't get the funding and so on. So I put up some of my own money and got some other people that believed in me, including Hay House, Louise Hay, and people like that. And we got all of the money together. And we went out and produced 2 shows. One was called How to Get What You Really, 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 Really Want, and the other was called Improving Your Life Using the Wisdom of the Ages. Now, what I have learned about myself, and what I'm speaking about here in the opening of this program, is that this thing called a burning desire is something that once you get it, it's like, I guess, herpes? It never goes away. You can't get rid of it. It stays with you. And even if you try to just, if you feel like you're on a mission of some kind in your life, and something comes along that offers a little different way of doing it, you can't just do it in a sort of half-hearted way. You can't return back and go back to the place where everybody else is along the mile. It's the extra mile, where there are no crowds, where you're all alone, where you start to live and you start to run your life. And for me, it has been about raising the consciousness of this country and this world. It's been about looking for outlets, whether it's media, whether it's publishing, whether it's radio, television, newspapers, magazines, whether it's giving talks. It's always about creating as a critical mass of people, that when we reach enough people who reach a certain level of consciousness, and I'll be talking about this a little bit more in the tapes that follow. And it's always an exciting prospect for me. There's many wonderful things that flow into my life as a result of producing tapes and appearing on television and writing books. It's offered me a wonderful, abundant life that I'm very grateful for. But inside, there's like this burning desire is like having a candle flame, an inner candle flame that never flickers. Though the worst goes before you, whatever the worst might be, whatever the obstacles, whatever the number of people who tell you something can't be done, these just become incentives to show the world that this burning desire that I have is going to be continued to be fueled from within, and I'm going to fulfill this purpose, because I know that when I showed up here on this planet in 1940, that something was placed in my heart about what I have to do. I have absolutely no doubt about that. The same way I have no doubt about each one of my children, one of whom just wants to ride horses and give lessons to little children, and has dropped out of college and said, "Dad, I just don't want to go to college." And I said, if being fulfilled and feeling happy and enjoying your life comes from taking little children and putting them on horses. And she said, "You don't understand. I'm a horse whisperer. I can talk to horses. I know how they feel." And this has been her life. I said, "Well, then go for that. Be that. Do that. Going to college is not necessary for you at all if that's where you want to go. And besides, colleges are always open." When I taught at a university for many, many years, I was oftentimes the youngest person in the room. Most of my students were older than I was when I taught at St. John's University in graduate school back in the 70s. So that it's really about fulfilling an inner kind of destiny, a destiny that once you feel it and once you feel it, you can't stop it. So with this kind of inner burning desire, I took on, just like when Your Erroneous Zones was published back in 1976, and I was told by all of the various publishing houses and given all the reasons why you can't go out to America. I remember an executive telling me in New York that you can't reach everybody in America unless you go on the Today Show, appear on the Tonight Show, or get on Phil Donahue, or get on the Dinah Shore Show, or whatever the network shows were at that time. And I was just sitting there thinking, but there is another way to go to everybody in America. And that's to go to everybody in America. Just get out there and get in your car and go do that. And doesn't that sound like an exciting prospect, the idea of doing it yourself and going from city? I was coal miner's daughter for Erroneous Zones. I was Loretta Lynn, right? Just going from station to station and delivering my books and just having the time of my life until ultimately many wonderful things began to happen. But it was like that inner burning desire is something that when there's people out there telling you that something can't be done, and this is the way it was with the public television thing. And so what I did is once we created the shows and we finally had them taped and so on, and had invested the money ourselves in them, I went to every public television station in America that would have me. And I made 68 visits. Now that's 68 cities to go to. And that's an awful lot of hotel rooms, and it's a lot of connections in Atlanta and Cincinnati and Salt Lake City and Dallas and so on. But it was that thing that's in here. It's that burning desire to be able to not just have success come my way, because never did I ever think how much money I would make or how much I would even be able to raise. Always it was about, here's a way to reach an awful lot of people. And I look at television, and I heard a statistic that said that the average child in America has seen 12,000 murders in his own living room and family room and bedroom on cable and commercial television before his 14th birthday. I read that or saw that someplace, and I thought, sure, they're simulations. Sure, there are people who are paid to act as if that is, but they don't all know the distinction. And you remember the events of the 11th of September in 2001, and so many children, 6, 7, and 8 years old, who've been accustomed to playing on video games in which people are killed all the time, just assumed that in the next minute they would all get up. And the building, while it all went down, in the next, it'll go back up again, and we'll start all over again. There was almost like they had become inured to the continuous reinforcement of violence as entertainment. And it had become a new way of life. And I've said to many, many parents, now I know that generation upon generation of people have been saying for as far back as Cicero, when we were kids, the way the world was, and then it happened in the first century and the second century. And I guess I'm saying that here, but I know for certain that when I was a young boy, that the way children talked to their parents, including myself, is very different than the way children talk to their parents today. How many of you have noticed that in the room here? Most hands go up. That we have a medium out there of talking back and being sort of smart alecky and seeing how wise you can be, a wiseacre you can be, and seeing how obscene you can be, or seeing how cute you can be, or just whatever, but that there's almost like there's been this lack of respect, not for necessarily for someone because that they're older, but just the lack of respect. I remember thinking when my mother got our family back together again, that nobody in my family, my two brothers or myself, and my mother was a little woman and never said to any of us, you have to respect me. And you can't swear in front of me, and you don't talk back to me, and you will do your chores. She never said that. She never threatened us once. There was an unstated awareness that you spoke with respect to this person. And every friend that I had in the neighborhood where I grew up on, it was the east side of Detroit. It wasn't any fancy neighborhood or anything like that. It was a very middle-class, lower middle-class neighborhood where everybody had paper routes and worked as bag boys and so on. But I never went into anybody's home and ever heard children talking to their parents and talking to others the way I hear it today. Nor do I tune into television, sir. I watched a show on a network television show just the other night, and I was in shock at how many times profanity was used on a regular network television show. The first time I'd seen that, because I very seldom have that kind of thing, that kind of energy. And it's all about energy. It's all about what kind of energy we allow into our lives and what kind of energy we allow into our homes. And the thing I loved about public television is that you don't see murders. And you don't see children in situation comedies in the name of entertainment seeing who they could put down in order to create a laugh, and then the laugh track is put in so that in case you don't think it's funny, we've just decided that it is for you. You don't see that. And it's a way of raising consciousness. And it was always about this idea of creating a higher energy, so that my idea about secrets or principles for inner peace and success have more to do with raising energy than anything else. So after those 68 cities and being told that we couldn't raise money and so on, I can report here very proudly that we passed the $20 million mark in money raised with those first two shows. $20 million for public television. So then I was asked if we could possibly put together 2 more shows. And this time they sent a limo. It was very different. And this time we had much more of an opportunity to have the kind of input and to create and produce the kind of programs that I really felt would fulfill this inner burning desire, this way of reaching as many people in the world as we can with a different and a unique message. And so I settled on recording in a place that is in American history as significant to the freedoms that we enjoy as any city in America. And it was in Concord, Massachusetts. And we traveled to Concord, and of course we're told that we can't do it in Concord. And you can't, because you have to bring in, when you do something like a television special, it requires all kinds of people, and big trucks, and shadow preventers, and people to stop the birds from singing, and all of the different things. And it's huge, and it's budget after budget, and so. But we went to Concord, Massachusetts, on the 29th of August in the year 2001, and we opened the show crossing a bridge. And I want to tell you a little bit about this bridge and lead into this program with this story. I'd like to take you back to a very powerful day in American history. It was the 19th of April, and it was 1775. And on the 19th of April in 1775, on one side of this river that flows through Concord, there were a group of farmers, and they stood on this bank. And now you have to remember that a couple of 100 years had passed since these people. A couple 100 years is a very long time. It's many, many generations of people who had now been here since the 1500s and early 1600s. And they had been told how to think, and had to have their taxes paid to a person who lived on the other side of this huge ocean in this little island. And the religion that the people were told to practice was imposed upon them by the state and by the king. And there was no freedom in making those kinds of choices about how I would like to think and how I would like to live my life. And very often the people were taxed, and they'd had no representation at all in paying their taxes. And it was getting worse and worse by that time. And on the other side of this river, there were a group of soldiers from that little island. And that group of soldiers were there to quell the people from reacting too violently. They were there to put down any resistance, because there was an awful lot of resistance. Victor Hugo in Les Miserables once said that there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And he suggested that when the time has come to change something, whether it's in your life, and whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in your business, when the time has come, it's an idea. It isn't that it's a timing thing. It's an idea. It's an inner kind of invisible thing called an idea. And when it shows up in your life, there's nothing more powerful than that. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's like that inner candle flame. It becomes a burning desire, and you have to act upon it, or you will slowly die. You'll stop functioning the way you want to function in your life. And a shot was fired that day on the 19th of April, 1775. And a soldier on the other side of the river fell dead. And there was a man who was one of those farmers who was there with those people. His name was William Emerson. And he was the pastor at the first parish in Concord at that time. And that was the beginning of the American Revolution and the French Revolution. But more than that, it was the beginning of the way we began to treat people. Because we then, after this war, we created something called a Constitution, which was giving the rights of man and women, such as us here today, listening freely to me talk about these things. I couldn't have given this talk in 1775 without having it approved first by the authorities. And we don't have to do that anymore. And in that Constitution, it made it really clear that the rights of man originated in spiritual principles, from the divine rights of their Creator. That the idea that people are created equal, and the idea that we all have equal rights, was not anything that existed on this side of the pond. And it didn't exist on the other side of the big pond either, the Atlantic Ocean either. This was a new and radical idea, even though we've taken it for granted. All right. And then in the same Constitution, just a few lines later, they made it really clear that every man shall be free from the establishment of a religion. So that there was something that was laid out that said, we have our rights come to us from spiritual principles, yet we are free from having a religion imposed upon us, because spirituality unites, whereas religion divides. And divides in the sense of excludes some and excludes others and so on. And this was not to be, so that there's no place in the Constitution which says that there shall be separation of God and state. Someone left me a letter on an envelope one day at a talk that said, "Dear God," question to God, "why did you allow all of those children in that school in Colorado to be killed?" And the answer from God said, "Didn't you know I'm not allowed in schools anymore?" And I thought it was just an interesting kind of, the idea that somehow we can't have spirituality, we can't have God, we can't have higher consciousness principles in our schools and teach them and practice them and make them a part of our life because we associate that with religion, has been one of the real miscalculations, I think, and misinterpretations of in our society. And I'll talk more about that a bit later as well. But 61 years later, it's now the 19th of April, and it's 1836. And at that same spot, at the Old North Bridge, where I opened this show called There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem, based upon a book that I wrote of that title, I walked across that bridge and read the monument that was erected that day, that William Emerson's grandson, whose name was Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was really the founder, one of the founders of the School of American Philosophy that didn't exist before them. And in Concord, Massachusetts, in the 1830s and 40s and 50s, here's who lived there. Bronson Alcott lived in a home that I walked through that day before we started the show. He had a daughter named Louisa May, who was one of the most famous writers of her time. Next door, right next door, there's a house, and that's where Nathaniel Hawthorne lived. And just a couple of streets over and a few houses down was Ralph Waldo Emerson. And 2 streets over from that was Henry David Thoreau. And Julia Ward Howe lived in that town, and they all came to this school of philosophy. And they were talking about ideas. Now, in the 1830s and 40s and 50s, they were talking about ideas that that we take for granted today. You know, Ralph Waldo Emerson gave a lecture at the Harvard School of Divinity, and he wasn't invited back for 33 years, and he was the most famous man in America in his lifetime. He was more famous than Lincoln in his lifetime. He was called America's teacher. He and Mark Twain, all over the country, would just go out and give talks and writing incredible poetry and so on. They all lived in this one little energy spot called Concord, Massachusetts. And Thoreau, who went to prison because he refused to pay his taxes to a government that was doing to the Native Americans what they were doing. It was our Holocaust. And you know, I had dinner the other night with my mother, who is almost 86 years old. And when my mother was born, now that's one generation ago, when my mother was born, women couldn't vote in America. Half the people in our country couldn't vote when my mom was born, and my mom's still around. They were talking back in the 1830s about the absurdity of women not being able to vote and women's suffrage. This was almost 100 years before it came about. They were opening up something called the Underground Railroad in Concord, Massachusetts, so that they would have a place for people who were leaving slavery. And this was 30 and 40 years before the Emancipation Proclamation, before the Civil War, when you risk your life to do this. This was what was going on. These were not just philosophers. These were people who put it into their lives and lived it and practiced it and being there. And here's what Emerson, Ralph Waldo, the grandson of his grandfather who was at that Old North Bridge, this is what he wrote as they sang this hymn on that particular day, on the 19th of April, 61 years later. And you can go to Concord and walk across that bridge and get a sense, and when you walk through the town, you sense the energy. I wanted to record there. And record there we did. He said, "By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flags to April's breeze unfurled. Here once embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world." And I want to read the rest of it to you. Well, there's 3 other verses. He said, "The foe long since in silence slept. Alike the conqueror silent sleeps, and time the ruined bridge has swept down the dark stream which seaward creeps. On this green bank, by this soft stream, we set today a votive stone, that memory may their deed redeem, when like our sires, our sons are gone. Spirit that made these heroes dare to die and leave their children free, bid time and nature gently spare the shaft we raise to them and thee." I just don't think writing gets much better than that, to tell you the truth. Spirit that made these heroes dare to die and leave their children free. And who do you think their children are? That's us, every single one of us. We owe an incredible debt of gratitude to people who took it upon themselves to create a state of consciousness and to state it in this American school of what is called transcendentalism, and to bring a sense of spirit. And that when I talk about the road less traveled, when I talk about the extra mile and it's never crowded, boy, I'll tell you, along that extra mile, when I write, I have a picture of Emerson and a picture of Thoreau. And I think about what it must have been like to be them and to go to prison and to go to Walden and to leave all of that behind and to take the criticism that was out there and to create a sense of well, they were the people who were responsible for the fact that not only that women can vote today, but that it isn't just white males that can vote today, that anybody, and that all of us are free. That's a spiritual principle. That's not a religious principle. And we took those 2 shows and we taped them. One of them is called "There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem," and the other one is called "My Top 10 Secrets for Success and Inner Peace." Now, this program deals with them in much more depth. I dealt with all of them in a very short time there. Then I took those shows after we recorded them in the First Parish, right there in Concord, and we took them out and were told by, again, so many of the authorities who were certain that they knew what could work and what wouldn't work. We took it out, and in just 16 days, on the very first pledge period, we raised between $7 and $10 million, and it's just beginning. because there's a hunger out there. And all the time, I was out there thinking about, we're raising money for public television. What we're really doing is creating a new energy. But for me, it's always been about, this is just another wonderful opportunity to fulfill something called a burning desire. A burning desire that is rooted in these principles. I'd like to also just share with you something that I wrote a few years ago. It was in a book called You'll See It When You Believe It. And I took it from a woman who I admired enormously. Her name is Peace Pilgrim. And this was a woman who just believed so strongly in the idea of peace. And since this program is about 10 principles for success and inner peace, I'd kind of like to define inner peace and success and then move on to that very first principle and go through those 10 principles in this program. She left everything that she had, gave up her name, threw away her birth certificate, her Social Security card. No one knew her identity. And she proceeded to walk across America. And she walked for years and years and years. And wherever she went, she was like St. Francis in the 13th century, or like Jesus 13 centuries before that. Just this beautiful soul walking amongst people and just promoting peace and harmony. And she was... I had communicated with her, and I felt very blessed to have done so. It's one of the great honors of my life. The other was to appear in Vienna, Austria, with a man whose name is Viktor Frankl in 1978, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning and lived in the concentration camps and decided that he was going to survive the horrors of places like Auschwitz because he had to tell the story and he had a sense of purpose and he had to tell it, and he kept notes. And there I was, a young psychologist with a bestseller, sitting on the stage with this man who had been through it, and I was just in... Well, Rumi put it this way, he said, sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment. And I was in a state of bewilderment and awe. And when they asked me questions, I just went, blah, 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 blah. I have nothing to say around this person. I felt that way about Peace Pilgrim as well. And she died out there on the road. She was hit by a car years ago. And she had what she called the symptoms of inner peace. Symptoms of inner peace. I love these. So that if you're starting to develop a sense of inner peace in your own life, here are some of the symptoms. Most of the time when we hear symptoms, we think about the symptoms of a disease, don't we? Or the symptoms of a relationship falling apart, or the symptoms of malaise, or the symptoms of scarcity in our lives. But there's another set of symptoms. And this is what they are. She said there's 10 of these. She said the first symptoms that you are gaining inner peace is that you'll have a tendency to think and act spontaneously rather than on fears based on past experiences. Spontaneity. Less having to plan things out and figure it out. More being willing to just do things that seem to make sense to you. And when I think about spontaneity and spontaneous healing, and I'll talk about this in some of the later principles, that whenever spontaneous healing ever takes place, whether it's the healing of a relationship or it's the healing of a disease, and sometimes when it's the healing of something as severe and serious as cancer, or high blood pressure, or diabetes, or any kind of disease process that people think is absolutely incurable, and people experience some kind of a spontaneous change, that it comes about as a result of living more peacefully and radiating out more peace outward. So that's the first symptom. The second, she said, is an unmistakable ability to enjoy each moment. That inner peace, the symptom of inner peace, is that you start going through your life, and here we are in a place called Miraval, out in between Tucson and Phoenix in Arizona, and it's just filled with so many wonderful opportunities for spiritual growth and joy. And as I was walking out there this morning, and we just happened to stop at a cactus. Now, you think about a cactus, and you think, well, it's a cactus, and it's a little prickly, and so on. But the ability to just stop and stare for a moment, and to listen, and to watch a jackrabbit walk past it, and to see the sky, the way that it seems so big out here. The opportunity to take any moment in your life and to begin to enjoy it is one of the symptoms of inner peace. You'll start knowing you have more of it. A third principle, she said, or symptom of inner peace is a loss of interest in judging other people. It just no longer becomes important. You begin to understand the truth behind the idea that when you judge another person, you don't really define them. You define yourself as someone who needs to judge. And it just starts to become less and less important. And you find yourself no longer putting labels on others and finding fault and looking for the... I remember in my training that I was taught by a great teacher in my life to always address people that you don't know if you don't know their name. Even if it's a young person asking for an autograph or whatever, always address them with a title of respect. Just get in the practice of that. And we were required to do that for almost a year. So if someone said hello to you, you'd say, yes, ma'am, no, sir, even if it was a 12-year-old boy, yes, sir. And the reason we were doing that is not because we were addressing the form, but we were addressing the unfolding of God. And that's what we were told to notice first. And when you see the unfolding of God in anyone, what you first see is that which deserves respect. And you address that. And judgment becomes almost impossible. A fourth symptom is a loss of interest in interpreting the actions of others. Peace is something that you start to experience in your life when it's no longer necessary for you to explain away why other people are doing what they're doing. Interpretation becomes less significant than just allowing. I have a pillow that was made for me by a dear friend many, many years ago that sits on my couch at my office, and it has 2 words on it, and I look at it every day. It says, I'm allowed. And I like it. I'm allowed. The next is this is number 5, right? A loss of interest in conflict. That conflict is something that you just seem to not want to be a part of any longer. You just find yourself moving away from it. And if you're in a relationship or in relationships with people who thrive on conflict and want more and more of it, you find yourself just passing. And it's an internal kind of, I pass here. That's no longer where I want to go. And I have found it's quite simple when you're in a state of inner peace to pass. And the way that you do it is you don't let the other person know that you're passing. You see, it's like trying to pick a fight with someone who's not interested in fighting. After a while, they just give up and go on and try to find somebody else who's wanting that back. And conflict is just something you just start to pass on in your life. And it's really quite easy to do. And then before you know it, you stop watching the news as much, because the news is almost always designed to create conflict. And you stop reading tabloids, because the tabloids are attempting to create conflict in you. And conflict is something that you just say, no longer for me. I pass. The next is, she said, is a the symptom of inner peace, is a loss of the ability to worry. You just stop it. People say, but how can you stop worrying? And I remember a great teacher saying to me, it makes no sense, this was in India, it makes no sense, he said, to worry about the things you have no control over. Because if you have no control over them, it makes no sense to worry about them. And I thought about that, and I wrote it down. I said, that's good. And then he said, it makes no sense to worry about the things that you do have control over. Because if you've got control over them, it makes no sense to worry about them. And I wrote that down. And I said, that's even better. And then he concluded by saying, there goes everything it's possible to worry about. And you no longer seem to have an interest in going there. The next is you begin to experience frequent and overwhelming episodes of appreciation, contented feelings of connectedness with others and nature. Frequent and overwhelming episodes of appreciation and contented feelings of connectedness with others and nature. There are two levels of energy in our life. One is depreciation and one is appreciation. Depreciation will always weaken you. Appreciation will always strengthen you. If you're a person who depreciates, that is, finds fault with, rather than beginning to accept and enjoy and find what is good. I've often said, probably when people say, what's the best rule you know about child raising? I said, try to catch your children doing things right as much as you possibly can. And they say, well, you don't know my kids. When I was a teacher, I used to say to them about how great they were at doing things right. And I'd try to find things them doing things right. And if they got their name right, I'd say, now we got a good start here. And I'd always talk to them about appreciating them. I remember telling them that they were all winners. I remember teaching in the inner city of Detroit in a junior high school and saying to all the kids, every one of you are winners. And they'd say, how could you say that, Dr. Dyer? That's not possible. I'd say, well, in every orgasm, there's 250 billion spermatozoas. And I'd draw a whole bunch of dots on the board. Dot, 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 dot. 250 billion, and they're all in a race for one egg. And guess what? You won the first race you were ever in. I'd say, wow! I'd say, you put 250 billion anythings down there, what are the odds that you're going to win? What an incredible person you must be, Appreciation. Finding as much possibility. And the other, of course, is contented feelings of connectedness with others and with nature. When you're here at Miraval, wherever you are in your life, whomever you meet here, whomever you're with, begin to see that mystical consciousness, that higher consciousness, is really about being connected to rather than separate from. As John Donne, the 15th century poet, said, no man is an island, entire of himself. Every man's death diminishes me. Therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. As you begin to see yourself less as separate from each other, and even separate from what you would like to attract into your life, and more as connected to each other, and already connected to what you are intending to create in your life, you'll start to realign your inner intention and create and manifest things into your life that you never thought were possible before. It's separation versus connectedness. The ninth is you'll find yourself having frequent attacks of smiling, she said. And you can tell people, one of the levels, one of the ways to evaluate spiritual consciousness and higher awareness is how much does a person smile and how cheerful are they. Cheerfulness is one of the qualities of spirituality. If you find yourself down, unhappy, depressed, morose, fearful, anxious, you're experiencing those emotions, and at the moment you're experiencing them, if you can stop and work at a smile and just look in the mirror at yourself and notice how glum you look. Notice the physical appearance that you have. But that's lower energy. That is weakening. Not only is it weakening the muscles of your face and making you frown and so on, but it weakens your heart, it weakens your lungs, it weakens your blood, it weakens the entire system. And if you can shift that to having more frequent attacks of smiling. And finally, she said, an increased susceptibility to the love extended by others, as well as the uncontrollable urge to extend it. An increased susceptibility to the love extended by others, as well as the uncontrollable urge to extend it. I remember William Butler Yeats once writing about when he would find himself feeling most peaceful in his life is when he had the almost uncontrollable urge to extend love at any moment in his life. And I think it's appropriate as we look at the idea of it never being crowded along the extra mile. That the principles of inner peace and success that are going to follow here are based upon those symptoms, and they're based upon something so simple and yet so elusive to most people. An internal burning desire, an inner candle flame that never flickers, regardless of what goes before you. And then you begin to practice these principles. And each of these principles that follow are principles that I have practiced and lived and will attempt to convey in stories to make it come home for you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Comments, thoughts, what we'd like to do? Yes, ma'am. What is your first name? It's Dana.
One of the challenges that I have in my own personal development is that I love what you say. I want it. When I get challenged, I find it difficult for my heart. How do you get your heart and your brain to be congruent?
Thanks. That's a great question. You get your heart and your brain to be congruent the same way you learn to hit a backhand in tennis. The same way you learn how to play a game of chess. The same way you learn how to set your VCR. The same way you learn how to meditate. You do it not just with practice, but you do it with a commitment to it. And when you have a commitment to it, you are raising your energy level. And I'll speak a lot here in this program about energy and energy levels. And very often the reason our heart is not congruent with our thoughts is because we allow ourselves to become immersed in lowered energy fields. And we allow, people say to me so often, what you say sounds great, but you don't know what it's like to be in my family. You don't know what it's like to be around my children. You don't know what it's like where I work. I'm in a world which is, noisy, which is rude, which is filled with hatred and so on. What do I do about that? And I always say, who were the most influential people that ever walked on this planet? And what did they have to teach us? That's what you want to go to. What did Jesus say to us? What did Moses say to us? What did Buddha say? What did Muhammad? These weren't just great teachers. These were people who lived at a higher energy field, who sent love in response to hate, who sent joy in response to sadness, who had forgiveness in their hearts as the only thing that they had to give away. You practice that. You practice it, and you stop yourself when you find yourself moving. It's like with the backhand. When you go to hit your backhand and all of a sudden you hit one and it goes over the fence, you don't keep doing that. You don't just keep saying, well, I just can't help it. It just keeps going over the... You stop and you make the correction instantaneously, at the moment. And if you start to practice it before long, it doesn't take very long. It's like I told you about the woman who was the prostitute up in Seattle. I mean, she made a decision that she was no longer going to be a victim in her life, and she was no longer going to be, and she was addicted to one of the strongest substances and she changed overnight, and she's never gone back. She made a heart connection. And I always say, I repeat the prayer of St. Francis every day, 2 or 3 times a day. And when I repeat that prayer, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Those are 7 chapters in Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. And he said, "O Lord, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console. To be loved as to love. To be understood as to understand. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying to self that we are born to eternal life." I just repeat that, and there's such energy in that. Eknath Eswaran taught me about the energy in that prayer. He said, carry it around with you. Carry that around with you. Just keep it in your pocket. It's right here in my pocket. I always have it with me. And the energy is always there. And it's just a very subtle kind of reminder. And the other thing I would say about keeping congruence is to turn it over to something that you're connected to, but that is higher than the energy of your thoughts. Turn it over to God, in other words. Just turn it over and watch and see what happens. There are 10 principles that we'll be talking about in this program. 10 principles that really are the cornerstone of what my life has been about, and what I have learned works and doesn't work in terms of attaining success and inner peace. Each one of these principles represents a way of thinking and living and practicing them that takes you away from the flock. I know when my little boy turned 13, in the Jewish tradition, of course, this is the stepping stone into adulthood with the bar mitzvah and so on. And I told him, while he's not Jewish, that this was really the opening time in his life for entering into, and many traditions and many cultures consider adulthood. And I wrote him a little letter and asked him to save it. And one of the things I remember saying on the letter is that if you follow the herd, you'll end up stepping in shit, It's just going to be a part of your life. There's going to be a lot of it, and if you're not stepping in it, you'll be trying to dodge it, and it'll be on your shoes, and so on. So you can either go along with the herd, go along with the flock, the crowd, if you will, and you'll find yourself having a lot of the kinds of problems that you don't have to have if you're out there in front. Or if you get out on that path and live in a way that you decide. So the first of these 10 principles I call having a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. So there's 2 concepts in here. One is openness and the other is attachment. And I'd like to talk about each one of them here. The problem for most people, it has been my experience, is that they have been raised to believe in what they can't do. And it's a very simple prospect to change that, yet most people never do. And it's one of the reasons why people are not very good at attracting into their life what they would like to have, whatever it might be, at any level. And I'm talking about from the very highest levels of miracles and healings and attracting abundance into your life to getting a job, to having relationships, the right person show up in your life. Anything that you can put your thoughts on or your attention on. I suggest the reason that people don't get the things that they would like to have in their life is because of that very simple principle that they are putting their thoughts or their attention or their energy on what they can't have or what's impossible. And it's a very simple paradigm for me. In the scriptures, there's a line that says, as a man thinketh, so is he. As we think, so shall we be. What we think about is what we become, and so on. It's endless. Emerson's notion that the ancestor to every action is a thought, that everything began with a thought. I was thinking about that yesterday when I was out there on Pete's Path, somewhere out here in Arizona, running, and just all by myself out there with the jackrabbits and so on. And it was getting towards sunset. And I looked out at all of the things that are here at this beautiful complex called Miraval, and thinking, this was just an idea. All of this was just somebody had an idea. Let's put together a place where people can come and have a spiritual community and have an opportunity to get their lives in balance, and let's offer them an opportunity to have healing take place. Let's give them a place where they can meditate. Let's give them a place where they can get massages. Let's put in some tennis courts. Let's have some dance things. Let's throw in some horses over here and have a horse whisperer come out and talk. And somebody had to act upon that idea. And it's true of everything that you can think of in your life. Just look at what you're wearing on your feet right now. Somebody had to think about those shoes. Look at the chair that you're sitting on. Just wherever you are, just gaze around and realize that it all started with an idea, with a thought. As St. Paul put it in the New Testament, that which is seen hath not come from that which doth appear. That is, the source of everything in the world is not in the world itself. It's in something invisible, something imaginary, something that is formless, something that has no boundaries, and that is the world of thought, the world of ideas. And if you can just accept that premise that what you think about is what expands, then if your thoughts are on what you can't do, or if your thoughts are on what you dislike, or if your thoughts are on what always has been, or if your thoughts are on what other people expect of you, and even if you despise all of that, and even if you find a lot of fault with that, and if you're very angry about all of that, about the way things always are, or always have been, rather, or the way things used to be, if your energy and your thoughts are on those things that you dislike, then you will attract more of what you dislike into your life. And it's almost as if it's a law of the universe. And that highly functioning people, one of the things that I learned from one of my great mentors, Abraham Maslow, many, many years ago as a doctoral student, is that when someone comes to you and they're looking for help of any kind, never place more than a few moments' attention on the problem. Because if your thoughts are always on, and what you're talking about is always on what is wrong, and what the problem is, you will become an enabler to that person to continue to manifest more of what is wrong and the problem in their life. And that highly functioning people, self-actualizing people that Maslow called them, were people who didn't think about what is, not even what is. And just notice in your life, as you think about this principle of having a mind that is open to everything, Think about how many people you run into every day whose thoughts are on the circumstances of their life and who talk about the circumstances of their life. This is what's wrong. This is what I don't have. This is something that I can't seem to get right. I keep having the wrong thing show up. We don't have any money. We don't have the right friends. I don't like the way my spouse treats me. My children are always this. Whatever. It's this endless inventory of things that people's minds are occupied with that are on what is. And if you want to know about self-actualization, you have to learn how to take your thoughts off of what is and onto what you intend to manifest with passion. You have to make that shift so that every time you are having a thought that is based upon the circumstances of your life, what always has been, what used to be, or whatever, you shift it. And you make the picture in your mind shift onto something that you intend to create or manifest into your life. So having a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing is a mind. This came from a man who wrote back in the 10th century in the dialogues of Tilopa and his discourses. And he was a Vedantic scholar who lived in India over 1,000 years ago. And he suggested then in those discourses that a mind that is open to everything is one that has the potential for attracting everything into its life. And a person who doesn't have a mind that is open to everything will attract exactly what it is that they have their attention on. So one of the things that we have to do to create a mind that is open to everything is to look at what it is that we believe is not possible. And then, if you will, rewrite your agreement with reality. Literally rewrite it and have it shift. And I want to tell you a couple of stories, but before I do and give some examples of this, I'd like to read something that was sent to me a few years ago. And I have never been able to get this story out of my mind. It's called, "Can I Have Your Attention, Please?" A young and successful executive was traveling down a neighborhood street, going a bit too fast in his brand-new Jaguar. He was watching for kids darting out from between parked cars and slowed down when he thought he saw something. As his car passed, no children appeared. Instead, a brick smashed into the Jag's side door. He slammed on his brakes, jumped out of the car, and ran back to the spot where the brick had been thrown. Grabbing some kid, he pushed him up against a parked car, asking, "What was that all about, and who are you? Just what the heck are you doing?" And building up a head of steam, he went on, "That's a brand new car, and that brick you threw is going to cost a lot of money. Why did you do that?" "Please, mister, please, I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do," pleaded the youngster. "I threw the brick because no one else would stop." Tears were dripping down the boy's chin as he pointed around the parked car. "It's my brother," he said. "He's rolled off the curb and fell out of his wheelchair, and I can't lift him up." Sobbing, the boy asked the executive, "Would you please help me get him back into his wheelchair? He's hurt and he's too heavy for me." Moved beyond words, the driver tried to swallow the rapidly welling lump in his throat. He lifted the young man back into the wheelchair and took out his handkerchief and wiped the scrapes and cuts, checking to see that everything was going to be okay. "Thank you," the grateful child said to him. The man then watched the little boy push his brother down the sidewalk toward the home. It was a long walk back to his Jaguar, a long, slow walk. He never did repair the side door. He kept the dent to remind him not to go through life so fast that someone has to throw a brick to get your attention. Not a great story? And it's a true story. And it's reflective of having a mind that isn't closed. And that's really what this first principle is about, is opening up a closed mind. A closed mind to the potential of what is possible for you. One of the things I read a book a few years ago by a woman named Tasha Abelard, and it was called The Sorcerer's Crossing. And it was a book written by a woman for women about learning to become sorcerers. But not sorcerers in the sense of witches, but in the true sense of the word sorcerer, which means of the source, moving into that level that Carlos Castaneda called impeccability. And I was having a conversation with a dear close friend of mine who's here in the audience named Sally. And she was telling me in this conversation about being a young girl and being able to move into the future, or see the future, isn't that how you put it, to see the future? And how she would, and she got real excited about saying that she could make a leap from being a child into adulthood. And in that moment of leap, she could actually see the future. We went to the bookstore right from there, and we were talking about it at dinner. And after dinner, I started to tell her about this, and I went and tried to find the book, and the bookstore didn't have a copy, but I've ordered it so that she would get it. I haven't read it in quite a few years. But one of the things that this Tasha Abelard spoke about was this thing called recapitulation. And it's a weird idea, but you almost have to be able to accept weird ideas if you want to have a mind that's open to everything. You have to accept that there's an awful lot of people who instantly shut out any concept that is foreign to what it is that they have been conditioned to believe in. And that's really what I'm attempting to have you look at here, is to just wipe it all out. Just clean your slate, if you will, from all of the things that you've been conditioned to believe that you can't, that are impossible. And as I was reading about this concept of recapitulation, I immediately got excited about trying it. Now, with recapitulation, what you do is you move your head. I'm not going to go through all the details of it, but I practiced it for several months. And it's a way of sort of clearing out all of the trash that's in there and opening yourself up to higher levels of impeccability, so that higher frequencies and faster frequencies can begin to show up, and you can begin to do some of the things that we think of as only available for masters or divine spirits or spiritually ascended avatars, and not us, even though it clearly says in the scriptures, Jesus certainly said that even the least among you can do all that I have done and even greater things. And I've heard some of the great masters in India reflect that the only reason I can do the things I do and you can't do the things that you can't do is because I know that I can. And you know that you can't. And you're convinced that you can't, and therefore you act upon what you're convinced of, rather than acting upon that which you're not convinced of. And the interesting thing about this is that every one of you listening here had a period of time in your life in which you believed you could do anything. You showed up with this incredible, optimistic, almost absurd belief that you could do anything. Just happened to see on the TV screen the other day a movie called Radio Flyer. It was about some little boys, and the Radio Flyer was the name that was on the red wagon, remember? And these two little kids were just convinced that they were going to fly and build an airplane, and they were going to do it, and their parents, of course, went crazy and so on. But while I was watching that, I thought I could remember myself back in Mount Clemens, Michigan, sitting there in my little wagon, which was the only toy that I had back there. And I had a red wagon, and my brother Dave had a red scooter. And he would go around on his scooter pretending that he could fly. And my Radio Flyer wagon was going to be the thing that we were going to sit in. And we used to talk like that and have these visions of being able to do that. And then slowly but gradually we grow up, and we begin to realize that all of these things are impossible, and we really can't build machines that can fly, and we can't create for ourselves the kind of life that we would like to have. And Tasha Abelard was training her students in the Sorcerer's Crossing to be able to move their head from left to right, and make a swinging kind of motion with their head. And when they would do that, you could then go back in time in your life, and you could recall virtually, not virtually, literally, every single incident, every conversation, every person that was in a particular room at a particular time. And you started out with, say, age as far back as you could think, say 3 years of age. And you would sit there alone in a cave, and you would move your head slowly, very slowly, from left to right, and you'd begin to recapitulate, and you'd go back, and you would be training your mind to go back and recall those. So you're getting the capacity of your brain, which has become dysfunctional because we've let and allowed everyone else out there to think for us. And we've been sort of pigeonholed into this is where you fit in, and this is what you can do, and this is what's possible, and this is what's not possible. And we bought into all of these pigeonholes. And she's trying to train people not to do that. And so I decided to try it. And I went back to the third grade. I started with the third grade. And I was in this school. It was Arthur Elementary School. And I thought, okay, I remember the teacher's name. Her name was Mrs. Ingalls. And she used to read to us The Secret Garden if we were good. And she would withhold the reading of The Secret Garden at the end of the day if the class was bad. And I loved hearing The Secret Garden so much that I would be out there kicking ass with anybody who would start talking or doing bad things, because I wanted to hear my last 40 minutes of the day, because she could just read and make it all come alive and so on. And I decided to go back to that classroom for some reason, and I went to a cave. And, of course, everybody just thought that I was crazy, but that's the interesting thing about turning 60 for me, is that I used to think that it didn't matter whether people thought I was crazy, and I used to even talk like that, but I still would read my reviews, and and I still would get a little bit concerned about it. Now I really don't care. And I went into a particular spot, and I would sit there, and I would go back to that classroom on a particular day. And you know where this all became so very vivid for me is that I remember when my grandmother was dying. She was 95 years old, and she was, they said, hallucinating. And a lot of people around my grandma said that she was, she had Alzheimer's or something. But whenever I would walk in to come and visit her, and I'd go into the room, she never acted crazy, ever, because I just never expected her to. I just always had an expectation that she was brilliant and fun and great, and she would do all kinds of strange things around others, but somehow, for some reason, when I walked in there, and I had been helping to support my grandmother secretly for the last 3 or 4 years of her life, without telling anybody else, because I didn't want my other family members to be thinking that it was something that they had to do. And I think that had something to do with my grandmother's respect for me. She always liked money. And great lady. And anyway, then when she would lose it a little bit, and she'd start talking, and she just sort of was talking in ways that just seemed very strange. She would start talking about something that happened in 1895. And she'd say, then she'd come up with, and she, you'd look it back or whatever date it was, she was only 3. And then she would say it was a Tuesday, and it was the 14th of April or something, and it was 1895. And she'd start reciting stuff, and I said, well, how could she know it was a Tuesday in 1895? It's almost 100 years ago. How could... And I went back and found a calendar to look this thing up, and sure enough, it was a Tuesday. And she had the name of the street, and she had and it was all in there. Have you ever thought of that? That everything that you've ever experienced, every conversation you've ever had, every person that you've ever met in your life, that every single interaction you've ever had is all in there, and it hasn't gone anyplace. You can access it, you can negotiate the presence of that and relive it and have it there. And there's all kinds of potentials. I mean, Deepak Chopra and I talk very often about how weird it must have been. You ever think about what it would be like if George Washington came back and was here and would see all of the things that are here, and the cars and the fax machines and so on. And Deepak and I were talking one day, and he said, just imagine what it's going to be like for people in the future. Imagine fax machines that you can step into. And fax yourself to the 14th century. And, that time is not something that exists at all. If you look at quantum physics, you got to have a mind that's open to that. Because if we had a closed mind, a mind that is opened, that is closed, we would have one recipe. Take one whole moose. Put it on a spit and turn it, and that'd be what we would all still be eating today. Whole moose is cooked on a spit. Somebody had the idea of, let's cut it up a little bit and let's saute it and let's throw in a little, and it's like all of the things that we take for granted that are part of the great variety of our life, and all of these wonderful modern things all came about because of people who had a mind that was open to everything. And when I went back and began to recapitulate and just see what was in there, see if there was a possibility that I could do what it was that she was talking about, and training these people to open their minds up to the potential for what they have and what they can create. And I started getting good at it, and I would recapitulate for an hour. I'd move my head from left to right, very slowly. Very slowly. And as I would do, I would let a thought come in, and I would let the vision of that school, and I would see myself getting dressed in the morning, and I could see the shoes that I was wearing. I could see where there was a little hole on one side of the shoes. I could see the colors of the pants that I was wearing. As I was doing this recapitulation, I would feel I could see the jacket that was my favorite jacket that I wore, and I could see myself walking down the street. And then as I would walk down the street, I would see if I could recall the addresses and who lived in what house. And we're talking going back 50 years. And it was all there. Every house would be there. And after an hour or two of doing this, it became so clear, it was almost addicting. Then I'd get into the classroom, and there would be Mrs. Ingalls, and she'd be sitting up there. And I remembered where I sat, and I'd go through this, to the left, to the right. And there to my left, right across the aisle from me, was Fred Green. I said, Fred Green? Where does Fred Green come from? I never even recalled that name in over 50 years. And sure enough, I could see what he was wearing, and I could see the conversations. And then there was Erlene, and then there was, it's like I went through all of the different people in the room, and it was all there. And it was all through this process of something called recapitulation. And I'm not really talking here about encouraging you to do recapitulation, although it's a great and wonderful experience to have, to start to open your mind up to what is there. What I'm suggesting is that anybody says anything to you like, what do you think about reincarnation? Oh, I don't believe in reincarnation at all. It says right clearly over here in this, but in the Bible, or it says over there that I've been told that I can't believe in reincarnation. And a whole bunch of people got together in the 4th century and said, we will not have any discussion of reincarnation. And I have bought into reincarnation and as being an impossibility. I always loved what Eleanor Roosevelt said when they asked her about reincarnation. She said, I don't think it would be any more bizarre for me to show up in another lifetime than it was for me to show up in this one. And that was her reaction to it. So when I hear about things like, and I've never had an experience, as I mentioned in the opening, I've never had any experiences with past lives, but I read Brian Weiss's Many Lives, Many Masters, and I was fascinated by that whole idea. And I began to try to see if I could learn more about that idea. My own mother, who is almost 86 years old, has had for the past several months a severe problem with back pain. very bad in her lower back particularly, and to the point where she can hardly get out of bed, and even when she does, she's in pain. So after hearing her talk about it every day, and calling her wherever I am on the road or when I'm home being with her, and seeing the agony that she was in, I went to the bookstore and I bought a copy of a book by a man named John Sarno, Sarno, who's a medical doctor up in the Northeast. I think it's in New Jersey. And I had had the occasion of listening to an interview that he had done. And I used to play tennis on hard courts on a regular basis. And at the end of 2 or 3 sets of tennis on a hard court, I would feel and experience some great back pain. And I heard this man interviewed on the radio, and he had a book out called Healing Back Pain. And he talked about a weird idea that all pain comes from the brain, which isn't so strange, and that back pain is really registered in the brain, but that it is something that originates with something called rage of some kind that we have within us, and that our brains can be talked to. And I love the idea. This is a medical doctor talking to us about talking to your brain and telling your brain to forget the pain. I do not remember the pain. I do not remember the pain. And whatever I have any rage about inside of me of any kind, going back as far, who knows? I mean, my mother still hasn't forgiven my father, her first husband, for the way that he treated her. And he's been dead for 40 years. And she would have been married 67 years or something to this man if he were still alive. And she's still angry. She still got some anger in there, and she admits to it. You know, she always says to me, it's easy for you to forgive him, but I was married to that asshole, you know. And that's very different. And whatever, all right? So I told her I went and bought this book, and because I went and bought it after I'd heard this interview, because to me, I just liked a guy talking weirdly about how to get rid of back pain, and that you don't have to go and have surgery, and you don't have to, and that it's normal to have certain things showing up in your back, and all of these things as you get older, and all of these disc problems and all of that most of it can be dealt with if you begin to train your brain to not remember the pain. Falls mainly on the plane. I like this. I'm feeling like Henry Higgins in here. So I bought the book for her because after I read the book, I've never had back pain again. It just stopped. I continued playing tennis, and I have little tiny spasms of it once in a while. But basically, back pain disappeared from my life after reading this book, and the energy of the book, or whatever it was, and I began to stop thinking rageful thoughts and so on, and began to whatever. And it was so I handed her the book, and I said, "Mom," I said, "I want you to read this book." But and it's very weird, because I'm always giving her something strange to think about or something, you know, she just says, "Wayne, you're so gullible, you know, just anything that comes along, right away you're trying it. You try this vitamin, or you'll try that, so take this, you know, drink this shake, or try that." And I said, I'm open to it all, you know. As I said, if someone's telling me that crystals will heal my hemorrhoids, I'm buying crystal chairs. You know, I'm willing. I'm willing to sit on it. All right. So I said, but the only condition, and I said, and I've been hearing you complain for 2 months about your back pain, and you've been to the doctors and they can't find anything, and blah blah blah. I said, just read this book with an open mind, with an open mind, and she agreed to do that. And I said, don't judge it, don't get angry at it, don't find fault with it, just read it with an open mind. And she read the book, and she called me. I was out on the West Coast, and she lives in Florida, And she called, and she, for the first time, I could tell, a smile on her face. And she said, you're never going to believe what happened. She said, I woke up this morning, and I didn't have any pain. I just absolutely didn't have it. And I talked to my brain, and I told my brain, you've got to stop remembering the pain. Forget the pain. And she said, and I've been very angry because some things had happened in my family that she was all upset about and she was hurt about. And she said, I let go of it, and her back pain was gone. Now, it came back a little bit a couple of days later, but then she began to do it again. And she's free of back pain. A mind that is open to everything. A mind that is open to everything is a mind that invites in miracles. I wrote a book called There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. On the cover of that book, there's a photograph. And that photograph has energy in it. And that photograph is something that I'm about to hold in my hand right now, the cover of that book. And it took place in Assisi. And I was there with a group of people that I had taken over there. And I can't tell you how many people have picked up this book and told me that the energy of the cover itself is what it is that attracted them to the book. When Nisargadatta, a great teacher in India, finished a collection of writings called I Am That, he said, you don't have to read it. Carry it with you. Just carry it with you every day for a year. And the energy of the words inside will come to you through the process of energy transfer. And you'll begin to get what's in there just by carrying it around. Now, that's a strange idea. You can carry a book around. But people do it. People carry little emblems around, and they carry little medals around, and they carry photographs around, and we're learning about the energy of photographs and so on. And this photo was snapped. It's a picture of me at a balcony in a castle in Assisi after I had carried a young man who had muscular dystrophy up the steps of this castle on my back, and as I put him on my back, he couldn't go any further because his legs just couldn't negotiate the stairs, and he felt that he was going to collapse. And I said, John, just get on my back. His name's John Grable. And I put him on my back, and I carried him up the steps and ran to the top of the steps, had energy like I'd never seen before, and I had a very bad knee and a bad leg. At that time, and I'd had to wear a brace when I ran and played tennis, and people had told me that I had to have arthroscopic surgery and so on. And when I got to the top of at the balcony up there, all of the people said, what happened? And I said, as my knee was about to collapse, I saw a vision of St. Francis of Assisi, whom I had been teaching on this particular trip. And my knee just righted itself, and I had the most incredible burst of energy I'd ever had before in my life. And I got up to the top of that, and my leg just didn't hurt at all anymore. And I used to walk with a limp with this leg, and was preparing to have surgery at some time down the road just to heal it. And they were even talking about replacements and all of that. And I walked out to the balcony, and I put my hands together, and there was a woman on the trip, her name was Pat Egan, who was taking photographs everywhere. And she took a photograph of me with my hands together in a moment of prayer, giving thanks to Francesco, the man for whom San Francisco was named, St. Francis. And she snapped that picture, and it became the cover of this book, Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. And a miracle had taken place. And you know why? Because I've always been open to the idea of miracles, of spontaneous healings, of the capacity for anything to happen, because the law that has allowed any miracle to ever take place since the beginning of time is still on the books. And if it can happen for anyone, it can happen to anyone. As Michelangelo put it, one of the people who had an open mind, The greater danger is not that our hopes are too high and we fail to reach them. It's that they are too low and we do. And having high hopes isn't just a song that Frank Sinatra sang with a bunch of little kiddies. Anyone watch that Ant Can't? Remember that? Make a rubber cheap plant, 'cause he's got what? High hopes. He's got high hopes. I love that. And all the little kids giggling in the background and so on. You remember that recording? Just recapitulate. Frank Sinatra. Frank, left to right. A mind that is open to everything says that the same force that has allowed anything to ever take place is in me. And if it has ever happened for any human being, it has the potential for happening to me. I can't tell you how many people told me when I was a little boy how absurd it was to believe that I would someday be famous. And how people just would say, "Oh, Wayne, come on, get a grip. Those kinds of things don't happen to you," and so on. And that I would be able to write, and that I would be able to create the kind of the energy to have books appear on bestseller lists, and to be able to attract. And still to this day, when I feel something internally about what I would like to be able to do, no matter how absurd, no matter how silly, whatever it might be, I had a vision always of going to Machu Picchu and being at that particular place in the Andes that I had read about, which wasn't discovered until 1911 by the West, and was. And I remember standing when I got to the top of Machu Picchu and standing at that mountain peak in the Andes and feeling the incredible power of that. I had taken 4 of my teenage daughters with me on that particular trip. And they were complaining and finding fault and bitching and moaning about everything. And I don't like this, and the altitude is that. And every place we went, they were upset and they didn't like that. And I want to go with my friends, and can't use my cell phone. You know, they don't have any. This doesn't work and that doesn't work. And we got to Machu Picchu, and they were completely different people. They were in a different energy field altogether. And they became loving and sweet, and they didn't want to leave, and they wanted to go out and meditate, and I want to go back there with them all the time now. I remember Machu Picchu, and they had a collection of those little, what do they call them, beanie babies? Yeah, they had about 300 of these things. We had put them in a big garbage plastic bag and taken them with us to Machu Picchu, and they were hoarding them, and they were upset that we were going to, that we might be giving them away, because we said there's little children there who've never seen such things. They started, Dad, here, let's give one to this one over here. Oh, look at that little guy over there. Let's give him. Oh, let's give that little girl. They became generous and kind and sweet, and not that they aren't always, but everything changed, and it's what I'm suggesting here in this opening principle is a mind that is open to everything and attached nowhere, is a mind that says, I'm listening. I'm listening. Yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah, I'll consider that. Whatever it might be, no matter how absurd, no matter how ridiculous it might sound to you, I'm listening. I have the power to be able to do the things in a spiritual sense that I have been trained to believe are impossible for me. Things like synchronicity, into which I can find myself connected, that there's a collaboration I can have with fate, that I can make conscious contact with God, that I can access and negotiate the presence of an intelligence and an energy that I never considered was possible for me. If you can't think it, if you can't visualize it, if you can't get a picture of it in your mind, and the only picture you can get in your mind, the only energy that you're putting into your life is on what's impossible, is on what you can't do, is on what always has been, is on what everyone else has always told you, then regardless of whether you like it or not, you will continue to attract what you can't do, what always has been, what is into your life. You have to make an incredible shift here and have an open mind and invite in the potentiality for virtually anything to show up in your life. The second part of this is the word attachment. Having a mind that is open to everything is one thing, but attached nowhere. And attachment, I wrote a book a few years ago called You'll See It When You Believe It, and there's an entire chapter in there called detachment. And one of the things that Maslow said and taught us is that self-actualizing people are living their life detached from outcome. Detached from outcome. And detached from outcome means that I don't do what I do because of what might show up for me. I'm not motivated by being famous. I'm not motivated by making money. I'm not motivated by other people's approval. I'm motivated by doing what I love and loving what I do, which I'll be talking about in the second principle. And it's the process of doing it and living it and loving it that appeals the most. And it's very difficult in a world which says that you are what you have, and you are what you do, and you are your accomplishments and your achievements and your acquisitions, when you begin to evaluate yourself on the basis of all of these kinds of things. And then attracting those kinds of things becomes the almost paramount motivator of our lives. But to shift away from that, to understand what Thoreau wrote about back there in Concord, Massachusetts, at Walden Pond, when he defined success as advancing confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavoring to live the life which you have imagined, then you will meet with a success, unexpected in common hours. And it's one of the most difficult things in Western civilization to get people to understand is that doing what you love and loving what you do is its own reward, and that whatever the universe provides for you in the way of outcome is what you accept. It's fine. So that what you are motivated by is a sense of peace and fulfillment and awareness that I'm doing what I love and loving what I do. And one of the places where attachment shows up most profoundly is in our relationships. That we begin to believe that who we are and our happiness is based upon another person or my family. And there's a wonderful writer who passed away a few years back. His name was Anthony DeMello, and he lived in India, and he was a Catholic priest. And if you ever heard any of his tapes or read any of his books, he's very, very entertaining, tells great stories. I recommend that you get to know him, Anthony DeMello, D-E-M-E-L-L-O. And read some of his books and read some of the stories and even hear some of his tapes. He's a wonderful speaker, brilliant man. He wrote a book called The Way to Love, a little book. You can carry it around in your pocket, literally that small. You can carry it in your back pocket, The Way to Love. And he suggests most of his life was about trying to teach his patients and parishioners and people who would listen to him about attachment. He said the source of all unhappiness in the world is attachment. That if you could learn to detach, and I recommend that you read, You'll See It When You Believe It, that chapter on detachment, because it sort of wrote itself through me. And I have to work at practicing it all the time, having as many children as I have, to understand that I am not the source of their happiness and that they are not the source of mine. And sometimes it sounds almost callous, but this is what he suggests in The Way to Love that'll help you to experience love in a non-attached way. How do you love someone and not be attached to them? And attachment means that I become immobilized if I don't get what it is that I'm seeking. Attachment doesn't mean that I'm not attracted to you, that I don't love you, that I'm not happy with you, that I don't love things. Detachment is about understanding that if what you would like to have from another person is not available, then you don't become immobilized. And he says here are two tests. First, can you say this to other people in a detached way? I am not really attached to you at all. I am merely deluding myself into the belief that without you, I will not be happy. Can you be in a relationship with anyone, including your own children and family, and be able to say to them that I am deluding myself into the belief that without you, I will not be happy? And the second this is the toughest one, I think, of all. One that I've met very few people who are in relationships, love relationships, spousal relationships, and so on, who can pass this test. Be able to say to the person you love, I leave you free to be yourself, to think your thoughts, indulge your tastes, follow your inclinations, and behave in ways that you decide are to your liking. You have that freedom, and you have my love in the process. It's a great test, one that I have failed on many occasions in my life, but I'm working on. I haven't failed it so much with my children. Somehow I think the advantage I had in growing up in the way that I did in a series of foster homes until I was almost 10, and being required to go out and earn my way in life, not having someone hand it to me. Somehow that gave me the ability to allow my children to be what they needed to be, because I don't think I'd be where I am in my life had someone else handed it to me. And I must say it's one of the great conflicts I've always experienced with my children, is how much do I give of the wonderful abundance that has showed up in my life, and how much do I withhold and allow them to create it for themselves. And I have found that most of the time when I give too much and take over for them and do it for them, that not only do they fall, but I find myself suffering more as well. And that when I allow them to figure out a way to create it for themselves, even if they get a little bit upset about it, that generally speaking, they're more at peace, and so am I in the end. So a mind that is open to everything and attached nowhere is a mind that says, I'm open, I'm listening, I'm willing to accept anything. I've never considered that point of view before. Tell me more. Wow, I'd like to hear about that experience. Maybe I can try that. I'll give that a shot. Yeah, that really appeals to me. I've always thought that that couldn't happen, but why should I believe that it can't? And when it comes to illnesses, and when it comes to the things that we think we have absolutely no control over, I'm open to the idea that anything is possible. And I'm not attached to the outcome, including my own happiness. Because as I said in a little novel that I wrote a few years back called Gifts from Icus, her parting message to everyone was, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. All right. Second principle is one of my very favorite things to talk about, something I've observed over and over again. I think I got the first idea for it from reading a book by Leo Tolstoy called The Death of Ivan Ilyich when I was in college. I call this principle, don't die with your music still in you. And I remember in Tolstoy's novel, Ivan Ilyich was on his deathbed. He had been an accountant in Moscow his entire life. He had been a commuter, what Jackson Browne in his music calls The Pretender. Remember that song? Out into the cool of the evening strolls the pretender. He knows that all his hopes and dreams begin and end there. And The Pretender is a song about someone who's chasing the legal tender and trying to get ahead by collecting as much money as he possibly can and going after wealth. But he's always a pretender. And Ivan Illich, as Leo Tolstoy's Ivan Illich, is also like that. And he's lying on his deathbed. And I remember reading this in my 20s and getting goosebumps as I listened to the end of the novel, where he's asking his wife, as he knows that he is dying, the question that just terrified me. He's saying, what if my whole life has been wrong? And I can't think of anything that just brings more terror to me than the idea of knowing that you're on your deathbed and you're asking yourself the question, what if I've been a pretender? What if all my hopes and dreams begin and end there? When I wrote Wisdom of the Ages, I picked 60 of the most profound and important teachers that ever came into my life. And the one thing that I observed about all of them, it seemed to me, is that not one of them got to the end of their life and died with their music still in them. And some of them died very young. John Keats, for example, one of the great poets of the 18th century, died at the age of 25. He's considered by the Britannica to be the greatest poet of his generation. And he was only 25 when he died. Beauty is truth. Truth is beauty. That's all you need to know on earth, and all there is to know. Well, he wrote that when he was 22 years old, from Ode to a Grecian Urn. At any rate, this idea of not dying with your music still in you is really about an awareness that there is some kind of purpose. And that purpose to everything and to your life is not necessarily based upon something that we can figure out with our brain. Like, my purpose is to become an accountant, or my purpose is to find the perfect place to live or the perfect mate. I don't think it's done that way. It's never, to me, an intellectual thing. It's always something that's of the heart. When I ask people to point to themselves, they never point to their brain. They always point to their heart. And Gibran, the Lebanese poet, said that when you're born, your work is placed in your heart. There's something that you feel, and it's very hard to put it into words. In fact, I think it defies words, because words are just more symbols of something that we're trying to express. And it's the feeling that we have in here that I'm here, that I have a heroic mission of some kind, that there's something more to my life than just simply going through the motions and being a commuter and collecting a certain amount of stuff. So to me, not dying with your music still in you is what Maslow called the top of the pyramid. And you remember the pyramid of the self-actualization that begins with the baseline being the longest part, but the baseline is just taking care of basic needs. Like, you learn how to handle and provide for yourself. So you have to, at the very base of this pyramid, you have to feed yourself. And you have to have your needs for water, and your needs for food, and your needs for shelter as you move up this. And then your needs for sort of like companionship and ultimately a need to feel a sense of belonging, need to feel loved as you begin to move up this pyramid until you get to the very top. And at the very top of this pyramid, there's just a tiny little space up there. And this tiny little space at the top of the pyramid is what we call purpose, where you're living your life as if why you're here is really clear to you. A sense of purpose is not that I'm doing what I was told I was supposed to do that was programmed into me by somebody in the sky before I showed up here, but that I feel as if why I'm here is being actualized. And when people ask me about how do I get to that place of purpose in my life, I always remind them that your life is like what Joel Goldsmith called it, a parenthesis in eternity. So who you are, Carl Jung referred over and over again to the part of us that is eternal, the infinite part of us. He said the telling question of a person's life is their relationship to the infinite. And until you have that relationship with the infinite, you will not know anything about purpose. So that you almost have to learn how to step outside of yourself and begin to witness yourself from the perspective of who you are as not being this thing that you're observing. You go to the observer, and then you even get to watch the observer. And that's when it starts to get a little bit complicated. But as the observer or as the witness to the observer, you're sort of watching and noticing. But the sense of purpose comes from being that witness rather than what you are witnessing. And when you get to that place in your life, you begin to realize that who you are in this physical world, this name that you've been given and this body that you are occupying, is nothing more than a parenthesis in something called eternity. It opens parentheses at the moment of your conception. It closes parentheses at the moment of your death. But when you come into this parentheses, when you show up here, you show up with nothing, with no thing. And you go from nowhere, Nowhere, nowhere. And in one instant, conception, you're in now here. Nowhere. It's all the same. It's just a little question of spacing. Nowhere, now here. So now you're in now here. Hopefully, all of you listening are in now here. There may be some of you listening that are not now here. But while you're in now here, you have some kind of an awareness that you're going nowhere. You're going back to nowhere. So it's nowhere, open parentheses, now here, back to nowhere. It's all one. But there's something different about now here than nowhere. At least we think there is, but we don't have any real confirmation about that unless you're Brian Weiss. Or you know about past lives or future lives and so on. Now, one of the great teachers in my life, Carlos Castaneda, whom I've referred to on many occasions, one of the things that he says is that the problem with humanity living at ordinary levels of awareness is that we are all beings who are going to die, but we act as if we're not. So that we don't really ever come in contact with our immortality or our infinity at all, because we are acting as if this body is all that there is and it's going to live forever. When in fact, there's an awareness in there that we're all going nowhere. And one of the things a story that I told, that I'm going to read for you, that I put in a book called You'll See It When You Believe It, which was a turning point in my life, that book. It was the book that I wrote that made the shift for me complete, from talking about psychology to moving into something called spirituality and higher consciousness. That was the shifting point in my life back in the 80s. You'll see it when you believe it. And I tell this story, and I'm going to read it to you. And it was a story that I heard told by a great teacher in India. A traveler from India went to Africa to acquire some local products and some animals. And while he was in the jungle, he saw thousands of these beautiful, multicolored talking parrots. And he decided to capture a talking parrot and take it back home and make it his pet. So now he's back home and he's got this talking parrot from Africa. At home, he kept his parrot in a cage, and he fed him wonderful seeds and honey. He played music for his pet, and generally he treated him quite well. When it was time for the man to return to Africa 2 years later, he asked his parrot if there was any message he could deliver to the parrot's friends back in the jungle. Well, the parrot told his master to say that he was really very happy in his cage and that he was enjoying each and every day, and to convey his love to his friends back in Africa. Well, the traveler went back to Africa. He delivered the message to all of the parrots in the jungle, and just as he finished his story, a parrot, with tears welling up in his eyes, fell over dead. The man was alarmed and decided that the parrot must have been very close to the parrot in the cage, and that was the reason for his sadness and his demise as well. So when the traveler returned to India, he told his pet what had happened. As he finished his story, his pet parrot, his eyes became all welled up with tears, and he keeled over and dropped dead in his cage. The man was astounded, but he figured that his pet had died from the despair of hearing of the death of his close friend back in the jungle. Well, the trader opened up the cage and tossed the dead bird outside onto the trash heap. And immediately his pet parrot flew up to a branch on the tree outside. The trader said to him, "So you're not dead after all. You tricked me. Why did you do that?" Oh, the parrot answered, "Because that bird back in Africa sent me a very important message." Well, what was the message? He told me that if you want to escape from your cage, you must die while you're alive. And that's the story I heard from a great teacher of mine. And that's one of the things that I'd like to share with you here in this principle called Don't Die with Your Music Still in You. You have to learn to die while you're still alive. And when you do that, what you do is you remove yourself from the identification of who you are with this open parentheses, with now here. And you begin to see yourself as eternal, as infinite. And you have now let go of your attachments to all of this worldly stuff. And then you have this awareness, this realization, this aha. And the awareness is that I came in with nothing, no thing, and I'm going to return with no thing. I can't take one thing with me. And if I come into the world with nothing, and I leave this world with nothing, what can I do with my life? And the answer is, you can't have anything. You can't accumulate anything. You can't own anything. You don't get that privilege. It's an illusion that you might live under, but it will always bring you a sense of suffering. The only thing you can do with your life is give it away. And that's when you'll find purpose in your life. When you find a way to give away your life. Back to Francesco, St. Francis. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in giving that we receive. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily making contributions. It doesn't mean giving stuff away. It's not about that. It's about finding a way to serve in some capacity. To me, that's what I believe Maslow was speaking about at the very top of the self-actualization. When you know that you are serving. See, when I went out and did those public television specials, and I was able to raise $20 million and then another $7 or $8 or $9 million in just a few days, I kept getting wonderful accolades. You should see the wonderful letters I receive from all of the stations around the country. And almost always they are thanking me for making their pledge drive successful and for raising this much money or for raising that much money and for keeping their jobs and for keeping the station on the air and all of these kinds of things. And that's all wonderful. But there's a part of me that reads those letters and thinks and knows that none of it is about that for me. It's about we are now able to have this message go out on television in prime time in every market in the country. Imagine that. Imagine how many people are going to talk about these ideas and are going to share them with their children. And it's always about an awareness. And It's like I often say about, like, I didn't even write the book, Your Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. It just sort of wrote itself through me. And I feel so grand and great that I had a statue of St. Francis there with all the time, every day. I looked at that and I got inspiration from somehow the idea and the energy of this particular statue that I had taken, that someone had carved for me in Assisi, who went back 8 or 9 centuries in that lineage. There was a carver then and is a carver now. And I feel the connection whenever I look at that statue. And I feel so strong and so profound that I was able to have this come through me. And I thank Francesco for the inspiration. And I never take credit for it, but I take the royalties. I do. And I'm proud to take them, and I take them, and I distribute them, and I pass them out, and I enjoy them, and I make it a part of more giving and more enjoying and so on. But always there's that part of me that says, you're making a difference. You're making a difference. You are serving in some way. And I'd like to suggest to you that it doesn't have to be as public as it is for me. In fact, it was not always so public for me for a good part of my life. I mean, I was 36 years old when Your Erroneous Zones became a bestseller and so on. So for 36 years before that, I was a school teacher and a college professor and a bag boy and a newspaper delivery boy and delivered pizzas and made hamburgers and things. There was always an element. There's an element of wanting to, giving is receiving. That when you receive, you want to give, and when they give, you want to receive. And there's this circle that is what purpose is about. And that's what your music is. And there are many people who equate what I'm saying with risk-taking. And I've had many people tell me how grateful they are that I've taken risks to talk about some of the things I speak about on tapes and on the media and so on. And I always respond to that with, there's nothing risky about it at all. The only risk for me is not talking about it, that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. That when you are actualizing yourself, when you are finding a sense of purpose, when you are able to figure out a way to serve, and if you don't know how to do that, just ask yourself, how may I serve? It's the difference between asking what are my quotas and always going after what are my quotas. You know that Jung talked about the archetypes that we go through in our lives. You know, the archetype, the lowest archetype as adults is the archetype of the athlete. And the archetype of the athlete is the time in our adult life when our primary emphasis is on our body and what it can do and how strong it is and how beautiful it is and what it looks like. And then we move, he said, through the archetype of the warrior. And the warrior is the time in our adult life when we set goals for ourselves and we're trying to collect as much as we can and we want to defeat others and we want to be better than others. We want to be number one. They're all warriors. Everybody you see on television during the football games and so on, they've all got their finger, we're number one. No, we're number one. That's all warrior mentality. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it's a very low level of consciousness and you'll never find purpose in being a warrior. Because as they say, there's 2 ways to have the tallest building in town. One of the ways to have the tallest building in town is to go around and knock down everybody else's buildings. But as we've learned here, that particularly in America recently, we don't like it when people knock down our buildings. And if you go around knocking down other people's buildings as a way of elevating yourself, it's going to come back to haunt you in major, major ways, isn't it? Because the world's outrage will become apparent. But the other way to have the tallest building in town is to focus on your own building and to begin to work on it and make it grow and so on. So as warriors, most of the time we're knocking down other people's buildings we're trying to compete with. And then he said, you move to the archetype of the statesman or the stateswoman, which is the time in our adult life when we begin to say, what are your quotas rather than here are mine? And how may I serve becomes much more important than what's in it for me. And ultimately we reach the highest archetype, what he called the archetype of the spirit, where you begin to understand what is meant in the scriptures by the idea that we are in this world, but we're not of this world. That's an interesting concept. You are not of this world. One of the things I had to do in some of my training was to imagine myself looking at Earth in a meditation without me on it, observing the planet with me gone. And my ego says there's really no need for Earth without you on it. I mean, why do we need an Earth and all of this stuff that's out there if there's no Wayne Dyer? I mean, what's the point? But the part of you that is the higher part of you, the spirit, the part of you that I'm addressing here, the part of you that has music playing in you and wants to get it out, basically if you look behind what it means to want to get it out, it's about serving. For it is in giving that we receive. And it is in dying to self that we are born to eternal life while we're alive. Like the parrot. You have to somehow get the message. And if you want to get out of your cage, the cage of being imprisoned, the cage of having to live your life as a pretender, you have to die to self while you're alive. And let go, as they say in the recovery movement, and let God. At any rate, at dinner last night, Jeffrey and his daughter Jennifer were talking, and she's a singer and a student at Berklee College of Music in Boston. And she has written some of her own songs, and she's going to school, but she really wants to be a singer, and she really wants to perform. And I talked to her last night. I said, so singing is really what you want to do? She said, well, yeah, that's all I've ever wanted to do. I said, then would you like to sing here? She said, well, we don't have a piano. I said, that's right, and we won't have one, because I'm not using my powers of manifestation on a simple thing like a piano. You only get so many of those, and I don't want to use them up. I said, you either do it a cappella or you don't do it. And I said, would you like to sing for this group? And she said, yeah, I'd love to. I said, well, then why don't you think about that tonight? And why don't you come up here? Her name is Jennifer Autumn Knight. Come on up, Jennifer. And she's going to talk to you and sing a couple of songs, or one, or whatever you want to do. You got it, sweetheart.
Thanks, Wayne. I just want to say how blessed I am to be here at Mirabelle for this event with Wayne Dyer, and it's such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And after meeting him last night, my life has changed forever. And he's been a part of my family's life for almost 20 years now, and has been a big influence on me the last couple years that I've taken the time to get to know his work and him as a person. And I just know that his spirit will always be with me. And I thought it would be really great to sing a song that I think all of you would be able to connect with, and dedicate it to Wayne and all the spiritual awareness that he's brought us all today. It's a song that I wrote actually a couple years ago. It was one of the first songs that I ever wrote, and it's just kind of stuck with me all these years. It's called Don't Ask Why. Don't run too far. You'll never find your way back to where you started from, spinning around in your circles. Keep your head up in the sky. Don't ask why. Take a look inside yourself. Don't ask why. You can hear your voice. Don't ask why. Can you feel it in your heart? Don't ask why. The answer's been there all along. You stand breathless. All your energy is drained down. I see the light I see the truth, I see the real you, hiding deep down somewhere inside. Don't ask why, take a look inside yourself. Don't ask why, you can hear your voice. Don't ask why, can you feel it in your heart? Don't ask why, the answer's been there all along. Don't forget, everything comes to an end someday. What if that day was today? Are you happy now? 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 Are you happy
Thank you, Jennifer. That was so nice. Thank you. Boy, the words to that were right on to what we were talking about for this entire program. That was beautiful. Very nice. It's not as good as my... No, I won't go into it. So, when I speak about don't die with your music still in you, I'm suggesting that what you have, that you were born into, is a need to move in a direction of serving in your life. And as long as you are doing that, it doesn't make any difference about the details, because your job is not to say how. Your job is to say yes. Thank you. Thank you. Let's take 5 minutes or so, and if people have observations or thoughts.
I recently went to a poetry reading. Coleman Barks, who is the foremost translator of Rumi, and one interesting thing he said was that Rumi is the most widely recited in Afghanistan and the most widely read poet in the United States. And I keep thinking of a line that Barks said, or he read of Rumi's, that was, "That which causes the rose to bloom resides in me, or in my chest." And it keeps coming to me in everything that you're saying, so I just wanted to share it.
Many of you know that Rumi is one of the great teachers in my life. I opened this book, The 10 Secrets for Success and Inner Peace, with an observation from Rumi. I often have quoted the poem that he said about love. He said, when I heard my first love story, I started looking for you. And then I realized how foolish that was. He said, lovers do not finally find themselves. They are in each other all along. And the observation I made at the beginning of this book was also from Rumi, where he used a metaphor of a wine glass. He said, take sips of this pure wine being poured. Don't mind that you've been given a dirty cup. The pure wine, of course, is the essence of God. The dirty cup is all of the stuff around you, including your own body and all of its imperfections. Don't mind that. Take sips of this pure wine being formed. And Rumi probably is, he was born in a place that is contemporary Afghanistan. Or Turkey, I guess it's Turkey today. And he's probably as well known in the Muslim world as Shakespeare is in the Western world, as far as being the master of the language. He made many wonderful and powerful observations. And I think what you've just cited is very relevant, that there's only one power in the universe, and that power makes us all what we are and allows the roses to bloom and allows our hearts to beat and circulates our food and grows our fingernails. Many times after the events of September the 11th on MSNBC and NBC, I was asked about a spiritual solution to every problem, because that book was released on the 11th of September 2001. And there was a full-page ad in the USA Today, the America's newspaper, saying there's a spiritual solution to every problem. It hit the newsstands at about 6 a.m., and 3 hours later, our country was changed forever. And there I was talking about that. And one of the observations that I repeatedly made was that in our world, if we were alive in 1775, we would all have been told to hate the English. They were our hated enemies. We hated them with a bitter passion. And then 30 years later, it was the French that we hated. And 40 years later, it was the people in the north hating the people in the south, and vice versa. 30 years after that, we hated all the Spanish people. 20 years later, it was the Germans we all hated. 20 more years later, it was the Japanese and the Germans. And then it was the Russians. And then it was the Iranians. And then it was the Iraqis. And then it was the Taliban. And the faces of who we are told to hate just keep changing. But the enemy is hatred itself. And until we get that and practice that, and Rumi taught us that the same force that grows your fingernails grows everyone else's as well. All right, this third principle that is one of the most relevant, particularly for young people, is called, you can't give away what you don't have. And it seems obvious when you say something like, you can't give away what you don't have, that if you don't have something, you can't give it away. But you'd be surprised at how many people struggle with this idea and with this concept of trying to find out why the things that they would like to have in their life just don't show up. If you don't have love for yourself and carry around love for yourself and carry around this higher energy of love, you obviously can't give it away. And I speak a lot about energy, and I want to speak about energy here in this particular principle, particularly as we think about the extra mile and it not being crowded. That everything in the universe is energy. And energy doesn't come in good and bad, and it doesn't come in right and wrong. It comes in high and low, and it comes in fast and slow. And that very quickly and very simply, energy moves from low to high. And that energy moves like the world of the solid, which we think of as stationary, is really nothing more than energy that has been slowed down so that it vibrates approximately to the frequency of your senses. So that the reason that your hand appears to be solid is not because it's solid at all, but because your eyes, which observe it, are vibrating at approximately the same frequency as that which you are observing. Because you know that if you take your hand and put it under a microscope and turn up the magnification, you're going to see a dance. And the more magnification you get, the more dance of particles that you get. First you'll get molecules, then you take a molecular microscope and you turn that up, and you see inside the molecules there are atoms. You take an atomic microscope and you turn up the magnification, and inside the atoms of this thing called your hand, there are electrons and neutrons and protons and so on. Then you turn up the magnification on the electron microscope, and you find that there are subatomic particles. And then you turn up the magnification further on these quarks, and you find out that they're tinier particles. And until you put them in a particle accelerator, these tiniest particles, and you ram them together at 250,000 miles an hour until they collide, and then you open up the particle accelerator and you look inside and you discover there are no particles, that everything is just energy. And it goes back to what St. Paul said, that which is seen hath not come from that which doth appear. That everything in the universe is just energy, and it's just everything is moving, but some things move faster than others. So that the world of the solid is a very slowed down energy. It's just energy that's been slowed down. It approximates the frequency at which your eyes and your ears are processing and picking up things. And then you move to a faster energy, which is the energy of sound. And the energy of sound is nothing more than sound waves that are out there. We can't see them, we can't get a hold of them, but you just take an oscilloscope and an audiologist and you can pick up the sounds, and the sound energy just goes high, and it goes low, and it goes fast, and it goes slow, but it doesn't come in problems. There are no problems in what you hear or what you see. There's only energy moving fast and slow, high and low. It only becomes a problem when you process it in a certain way. And then we move to a faster energy, the energy of light, which moves faster than the energy of sound. And then we move to the energy of thoughts, and every thought that we have has an energy. And in a wonderful book called Power versus Force, Dr. David Hawkins has elaborated a system called a map of consciousness, in which they identify every thought that we have and its energy component. So that lower energy, that a thought of shame, for example, and a thought of hate, and a thought of fear, and a thought of stress, and any of these kinds of lower energy thoughts are thoughts that weaken us. And I'll talk more about these in the last principle in this program, the 10th principle. And then we get to looking at what thoughts and what energy they have, and why would I have certain thoughts if they weaken us, until ultimately we get to the fastest and the highest energy in the universe, which is the theory upon which a spiritual solution to every problem is based, the notion that spiritual energy is the fastest energy in the universe. And that when we bring the energy of spirit to the presence of the energy of problems, because all of our problems show up in the world of form, in the world of the solid. That's where we have them. And when we can bring spiritual energy to the presence of spirit, or to the presence of form rather, we nullify that. So that if you're in a dark room and someone brings a candle into that room, what is happening is that you don't have to announce to the darkness, you'd better dissolve now, you're going to have to get out of here because I'm bringing light in here. Darkness, rather, cannot survive when light is brought into a room, because light is a faster energy than darkness. And it's a metaphor for the prayer of St. Francis. Where there is hatred, if I can bring love to the presence of hatred, hatred cannot survive. And it was the message of the greatest spiritual teachers who ever walked among us, and all religious practices are based upon this idea of bringing higher and faster energy to the presence of lower and slower energy. And when we do that, we dissolve and nullify it and make it impossible for it to exist. So that if we can think and change around the energy of our thoughts, and in Power versus Force, Hawkins speaks about how to go about doing that in ways that I consider to be brilliant. And it's a book I encourage all of you to read. And there's nothing in it for me other than to have you raise your consciousness, which in turn will help to create the purpose that I've been speaking about here in this program. So, when I suggest to you that you can't give away what you don't have, I'm not just simply saying if you don't have love, you can't give it away, and if you don't have esteem for yourself, then you can't see the world in a state of esteem. What I'm suggesting to you is that there are a couple of ways to look at the world. One of them is through eyes of appreciation, and one of them is through eyes of depreciation. And that most people that I have encountered in my life, and it's why I talk about this in commencement addresses and make this one of the secrets, if you will, for success and inner peace along the extra mile. Most people are spending their life looking for occasions to be offended. And when you are looking for occasions to be offended, you are a depreciator. And you will never have any shortage of occasions to be offended. They're out there all the time. There will always be somebody who will dress differently, whose hair won't look the way you think it should, whose clothes won't match, whose language is something that you don't like, whose demeanor is off or whatever. And you'll find that every day, no matter how nice a beautiful day it might be, there's still a puffy cloud that can come through and ruin it, and they're looking for that. I have a habit of running in hallways and corridors in hotels. I've been doing it for 20 or 25 years. It's just a much easier way of getting in my exercise than going outside and then having to, if I'm in a cold climate, having to take a lot of extra clothing with me and so on. Pair of shorts, pair of running shoes, off you go up and down the corridor. An hour goes by, it's air conditioned, the carpeting is nice, and you get your heart rate up and all of the things that you are doing this for, and it's just a wonderful practice. And I've been doing it in hotels, and I have a whole idea inside of me of how to go about doing that before I start, because I invariably am going to run into people who are going to not like my being in the hallways. And it isn't because I'm in the hallways, it's because they have a strong expectancy that has been disconfirmed. And their strong expectancy is that a hallway is not a place where you run into a sweaty body. That's a place you're supposed to be in a gym, or you're supposed to be in a workout room or out on the street, but not here in the hallway. So some people will walk out of their rooms and they will look at me and they'll see me, and then on their way they have just found an occasion to be offended. And on their way to the elevators, when I'm already past and they assume that I can't hear them, they don't know I'm psychic. I will hear them saying, "Isn't that disgusting? Isn't that awful? And what is that person doing? And how could he? Doesn't he realize what?" Blah, blah. And they're on the elevator. They're downstairs. They're having breakfast. They're in the afternoon. They're talking to their wife. They're yelling at their kids, and it's all because they saw this guy running in the hallways or something like that, or somebody drove a certain way on the freeway or whatever it might be. And then there are other people who are looking for occasions to be happy. And appreciators. And I'll walk out of I'll hear a door turn, and invariably I don't make eye contact with people when I'm running in hallways. I just find it's just a whole lot easier to just keep going. But I've always been amused by this. Sudden people come out and say, "What a terrific idea! I never thought of that myself. Why, that's great. I'm going to go out when I get I'm going to go out and do my running right here. I didn't think I could run." And you'll hear them, instead of being offended, they're appreciating it. And one of my favorite experiences I ever had running up and down the corridors of a hotel was a woman. She had to be 90 if she was a day. And she came out and she had a little cane, and she was and she saw me running in the hallway. And she looked at me and she said, "Stop." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "You're running in the hallway." I said, "That's right." She said, you know, if you've got that much energy, why don't you run into my room and be with me for a little while? Well, that's my idea of someone who's got an attitude of appreciation rather than one of depreciation. And she, all the way down the court, I escorted her down there, and she just thought it was fantastic. She said, that is great. I love that much energy. Are you always that up? Are you always, you know? So that what I'm speaking about here in this third principle is I'm speaking about something called, what I call the law of attraction. And the law of attraction is something that most people don't really grasp into their lives. Question: who do you associate with? What do you read? Who do you find yourself talking about? Where do you go? Who do you seek out? What kinds of things do you watch as entertainment? These are all part of this thing called the law of attraction. And there's something that Hawkins speaks about in Power versus Force that he calls attractor energies. And it's something I'd like to suggest to you when I talk about you can't give away what you don't have. That whatever it is that you are giving away, in the way of being offended or being an appreciator. And by the way, appreciation versus depreciation is the highest form of energy that you can have to your thoughts. In other words, every time you have a thought of depreciation, you have weakened yourself in some form. Any kind of a thought of depreciation. Whereas if you can shift a thought of depreciation into one of appreciation, even for that which you have been conditioned to believe deserves to be depreciated, if you can figure out a way to change and alter your thoughts, then you move into a higher energy. But more than moving into a stronger and a higher energy with appreciation, is that you move into a level of consciousness called synchronicity, in which you start to negotiate the presence of energy to serve as an attractor pattern. And that what I'm speaking about, solid energy as the lowest form of energy, and spiritual energy as the highest and the fastest form of energy, and that spiritual energy, the energy of love, the energy of cheerfulness, the energy of kindness, the energy of peace, when this energy is brought to the presence of the energy in which you have problems, lower energy, that these problems dissolve, they can't survive any more than darkness can survive in the face of light, then there is some kind of a gap that you have to negotiate between the world of problem energy and the world of higher energy. And in the next principle that I'll be speaking about, called Embracing Silence, I will teach a meditation, and I will teach a new meditation. We'll practice it here, in which you can get into that gap. And when you are able to get into that gap, you absolutely negotiate the presence of this higher energy. And it's what I call making conscious contact with God. And that when you are able to do that, you access it much more readily. But what you have to look at here, when I say you can't give away what you don't have, is to ask yourself, if I can't give away what I don't have, it means that I am giving away what I do have. And because it's the only thing I can give away. I have to have it to give it away. So, and if energy is the vehicle upon which things are attracted and come into my life, then what is it that I am sending out there? Because it is in giving that we receive. What is it that I'm giving? What am I sending out there? What kind of energy do I send out there? And begin to look at that as the rationale and the explanation and the reasoning behind what is showing up in your life. That it really has nothing to do with what's going on outside of you in other people. and in other events, and in what other people are saying or doing or circumstances of your life. As much as we like to use that as an explanation and a rationale for it, that in fact, if you can change around your thinking to ask yourself, why do I keep attracting what it is that I'm attracting into my life, and what can I do to attract something different into my life? These things that we're calling attractor energies, that possibly, just possibly, I might be able to come to a place where I recognize that everything that's going on in my life, everything, I take responsibility for. And if I continue to attract the wrong people, or scarcity instead of abundance, or illness instead of health, or unhappiness rather than happiness, or fear rather than faith. And again, I always go back to that very famous prayer of St. Francis, where there is doubt, let me bring faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Where there is hatred, love. And if I can find a way to rid myself of those, just the thoughts, that I might possibly open myself up to a new idea, a mind that is open to everything, is one in which I say that I have been responsible for attracting all of these things into my life, and now I'm going to work at it for a given period of time of attracting something different into my life. I'm going to go with new attractor patterns of energy. I'm just going to go with it and see if I can make that shift begin to take place. And this thing that I have referred to as synchronicity is something that Jung said is something that is very real and is very powerful and is something that you can access. Which means that as you reach a faster energy yourself, you see, if everything is energy and nothing happens until something moves, and everything is moving, then you yourself are just a great big bundle of energy. You are just vibrating, and if you are a bundle of energy, if you buy this idea that your hand and your feet and your eyes and your entire body is really nothing more than a series of very, very tiny subatomic particles all moving together very fast with spaces between them, and you see that and you can get that, then you recognize that there's got to be a frequency at which you are vibrating. It's got to be vibrating at some frequency. And if you can also accept the idea that if I could move to a faster and a higher, more spiritual energy, that I will literally change the vibration at which I am vibrating, then it begins with the thoughts. It begins with how I am processing and thinking thoughts, that I can absolutely get to a place where I can start to radiate out different kinds of energy. And